Ćao svima! Welcome to the second part of our videos dedicated to the verbs of motion in Serbian language. In our first video, Miljana introduced verbs of motion and based on your comments, I see she managed to make them less intimidating for you. So, find the notes from the first video, grab a snack and get ready for part 2. But before we get into more details, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button for more language learning adventures. Okay, let's dive in. As we mentioned in part 1, verbs of motion describe some sort of movement from point A to point B. The focus of our previous video were the most common verbs of motion in imperfective form. You might wonder, imperfective what? Well, Serbian verbs have two verbal aspects, imperfective and perfective. These forms help us differentiate an ongoing, unfinished action from a completed one. In English language, we have continuous tenses to help us express unfinished actions. Since in Serbian we only use 3 main tenses, we need this difference in verbal aspect. So remember this, imperfective stands for unfinished and perfective stands for finished or completed actions. So, for one verb in English, you typically have to memorize 2 Serbian verbs. Not easy, I know, but we are here to help. So the topic of this video is the perfective pairs of the verbs of motion. In other words, we will focus on the motion verbs that describe the action that has already been completed. Our main focus, just like in part 1, will also be those most frequent motion verbs. But stay till the end, as I will spice up the motion verb list with some additional verbs that you can use when you want to show off your amazing knowledge of Serbian vocabulary in front of your friends or family. Now, I'm going to give you the perfective verbs, right next to their imperfective pairs that Miljana covered in part 1. Dolaziti, doći, odlaziti, otići, ulaziti, ući, izlaziti, izaći, prelaziti, preći, prolaziti, proći, polaziti, poći, stizati, stići. You can notice some patterns here. Just like almost all imperfective verbs, except for verb stizati, and in laziti, the perfective verbs also have identical endings, ci. Another thing in common are the prefixes that stay the same and give verbs the same meaning. Except for a little change in odlaziti, otići, but I will explain that later. So, let's see some key differences between perfective and imperfective motion verbs in the present tense. Perfective verbs have a different conjugation than imperfective ones. But the good news is that due to the same ending in infinitive, which is, as you know, ci, they also have a similar pattern when we conjugate them in the present tense. So the sound ch will turn into sound j, as I'm going to show you now. Doći. Ja dođem, oni dođu. Zovem te kada dođem kući. Ući. Ja uđem, oni uđu. Dobrodošli, uđite. Izaći. Ja izađem, oni izađu. Čim izađem napolje, počnem da kijam zbog polena. Preći. Pređem, pređu. On ne može da pređe ulicu jer ima 5 godina. Proći. Prođem, prođu. Kada prođeš pored prodavnice, svrati da kupiš hleb. poći, pođem, pođu. Čim pođem na odmor, osjećam se bolje. Before we move on, just wanted to point out that if you're struggling with how to pronounce Serbian sounds, such as the sound j that we see in all of these examples in the present tense, you can learn how to do that in our pronunciation course. Our self-study pronunciation course covers all 30 Serbian sounds in detail and lets you practice them through a variety of exercises. You can listen to recordings, but also record yourself and get our feedback. In lesson 6 of our pronunciation course, we cover the sound j along with other similar sounding Serbian sounds, so you can learn how to not confuse them and help others understand you better. Now, back to our motion verbs. We mentioned that the conjugation of these verbs in the present tense follows the same pattern, which includes the consonant j. But, as is always the case with Serbian, there must be some irregular verbs. As you remember from part 1, Miljana mentioned one irregular verb in the imperfective group, stizati, stižem. Just like in its imperfective form, it is also irregular in its perfective form, stići, stignem. You can remember this verb by comparing it to the verb that you already probably know, pomoći. Pomoći, pomognem. Stići, stignem. They have the same conjugation. Another exception in this group is the verb otići. As you can see, unlike its imperfective pair odlaziti, this verb in its perfective form has the letter t instead of d, even though the prefix od is the same in its core. However, when we conjugate this perfective verb, the letter t goes back to d. Otići, odem. You can compare this verb with the conjugation of the verb ići. Ići, idem. Otići, odem. They have identical conjugation, and this will help you remember how to conjugate the verb otići. Now, let's see examples in the present tense that will help you understand when to use perfective verb and when to go with an imperfective one. The good rule of thumb is that in the present tense, most of the time, you would need to use the verbs in the imperfective form. This is because in the present tense, we express actions that are happening right now, so they are not finished. There are situations, though, when we do need to express a finished action in the present. So let's compare these two situations. Let's use the verb doći in perfective and in imperfective form. Često dolazim u ovaj park. Javi se kada dođeš kući. You see, both verbs are in the present tense. In the first sentence, we had to use imperfective form because it's a repetitive action. Često dolazim u park. In the second sentence, we are saying, when you get home, let me know. We want to emphasize that the action of coming home is completed, so we need to use a perfective form. Here is a tip for you. When you see a conjunction kada and you need to use a verb in the present tense, pick a perfective verb. Let's see two more examples. Upravo prelazim most. Vidimo se za par minuta. Upravo implies an action that is happening right now, and that's why we are using imperfective verb here. Čim pređeš most, vidjet ćeš zgradu univerziteta. Again, conjunction čim, just like conjunction kada, which we had in the previous example, implies that an action in the present will be completed at that moment, and that's why we need to use the perfective verb here. Now that we know the conjugation and use of motion verbs in the present tense, let's move on to the past tense. These verbs of motion also have irregular conjugation in the past tense. However, the good news is that even in the past tense, we will be able to spot some sort of a pattern. So pay attention to any patterns as we read the verbs and example sentences in the past tense together. Doći, došao, došla. Ona je došla na vrijeme. Otići, otišao, otišla. Kada si otišao na posao. Ući, ušao, ušla. Ušli su u kuću pre kiše. Izaći, izašao, izašla. Izašle smo u grad u petak. Preći, prešao, prešla. Prešli smo granicu sa Mađarskom. Proći, prošao, prošla. Prošla sam pored glavnog trga. Poći, pošao, pošla. Pošla sam u prodavnicu bez novčanika. Stići, stigao, stigla. Da li je stigla na avion? The forms I gave after each verb are just masculine singular ending in o and feminine singular ending in la. But as you can see from example sentences, we have other endings in the past tense depending on who the verb refers to. So, have you spotted any patterns? As you can see, all but one verb, and again, it is the verb stići, have a consonant sh in the past tense form. So, when to use these perfective verbs as opposed to imperfective ones in the past tense? Just like with the present tense, we would use the perfective form when we want to describe a completed or finished action. Remember how in the present tense I told you that we rarely use the perfective form that implies the finished action? Well, that's not the case with the past tense. Here you can use both verbal aspects in equal measure and determine which one to use based on the context. So to help you with this, again, we will go through a few example sentences. I'm going to give you a sentence and also give you some time to pick the right verbal aspect, perfective or imperfective, that goes into that sentence. I will give you the verbal pairs in parentheses in each sentence. So let's start. So the first sentence, on, juče, and then we have two verbs, stići or stizati, na posao, na vreme. So which verb would you put here, stići or stizati, in the past tense? The correct choice is the verb je stigao. On je juče stigao na posao na vreme. This is because we are talking about the action that was done. The person arrived to work on time yesterday. So we need to choose the perfective form of the verb, stići, and then in the past tense, je stigao, because we are talking about the completed action in the past. So let's look at our next sentence. Kada je bila mlađa, ona često izlaziti ili izaći u grad sa drugaricama. So which verb would we use here? We are talking about a repetitive action, često, often, that somebody repeated in the past. Kada je bila mlađa, when she used to be young. Because we are talking about repetitive action in the past, we will use imperfective verb, izlaziti. So let's hear the sentence with the verb. Kada je bila mlađa, ona je često izlazila u grad sa drugaricama. Are you ready for another example? U koliko sati vi stići ili stizati na aerodrom? Our question is asking about the time when someone arrived at the airport. So we are talking about a finished or completed action. So we will be choosing a perfective verb stići. U koliko sati ste vi stigli na aerodrom? And the last example. Kad god mi dolaziti ili doći u goste kod prijatelja, donosili smo im njihovo omiljeno vino. So the word kad god is the key word here. Kad god is whenever. So it suggests a repetitive action in the past. And now you already know that when we are using repetitive actions in the past, we need to use an imperfective verb. So the correct answer here is kad god smo mi dolazili kod kumova, donosili smo im njihovo omiljeno vino. Dolaziti is an imperfective verb, and that's why we are choosing it in this sentence. I know this sounds very complicated, but try not to be bothered with verbal aspect too much when you're speaking. Even if you choose the wrong verb from a verbal pair, what you're trying to say will most likely come across just fine. So, thank you for staying with me through all these examples and long explanations. Before we wrap up, I would just like to share a few more, less common verbs of motion. I promised that at the beginning. Do you know how to say, for example, to rush, to teter, to crawl in Serbian? These are a bit less frequent and more specific verbs of motion, and your Serbian friends and family will be impressed when you use them. So let me show you what they are. Juriti. Svako jutro jurim na posao. Vući se. Deca se vuku iza mame. Puziti. Beba puzi po celom stanu. Teturati se. Ako popiješ celu bocu vina, teturat ćeš se do kuće. Skakati. Kada Đoković pobedi, mi skačemo od sreće. And with this, we complete the story of motion verbs in Serbian. Yes, they're not the simplest language lesson you'll come across, but we hope you'll be able to manage them with these 2 videos we made. If you'd like to learn more about them, you can always check our pre-intermediate course and find interesting exercises and explanations, along with lessons about the present, past, and future tense in Serbian. Each of these grammar units is covered not only through our video lessons, but you can reinforce it with worksheets, quizzes, interactive exercises, and even conversation lessons that we organize once a month for free for all course participants. I will leave the link to the course in the description of this video. Now, let's hear from you. Can you compare perfective and imperfective verbs of motion in the comments? Write some examples of your favorite or least favorite pairs that we mentioned. Do you maybe have another verb of motion that's giving you a hard time? Let us know that as well, and we will answer as soon as possible. That's it for now. More videos like this are coming soon, so stay tuned. Čujemo se, ćao!